There are wounds that never bleed, scars that live beneath the skin, hidden behind forced smiles and long nights of silence. But what if, one day, someone looked close enough to see them? What if that single moment of recognition could rewrite everything? Before you hear my story, take a breath, because what you're about to feel might remind you of your own invisible scars. Stay until the end, because sometimes the room smells of old soap and rain is the one we least sitting on the edge of my bed, pressing my fingers against the bruises that weren't really there, at least not in a way anyone could see. It was 1997, winter in a small town outside Sao Paulo, and the air was so heavy that even breathing felt like a confession. My chest ached in a way I couldn't explain to anyone. The kind
That
of nothing could break
that doesn't
me.
bleed,
I let them
but
believe
eats you
that
from the
because
inside
the
out.
truth would have
People
sounded
used to
insane.
say
I
that
was strong.
every morning
That I
woke
smiled,
up too
carrying
easily.
the weight of words, of silence, of memory that had no witness. My body wasn't covered in scars. They lived beneath my skin, pulsing quietly like old ghosts. And the cruelest part was how invisible they were. No one noticed the way my hands trembled when someone raised their voice.
Years
Or
of
how I
pretending
avoided
that
mirrors
I'm fine
after
wasn't a lie.
midnight.
It
I had
started
learned
when
to hide
I
it
was
perfectly.
12.
My father's temper wasn't fire, it was ice. He didn't scream. He froze you with silence until you begged to be seen again. My mother called it discipline. He only wants the best for you, she'd say, wiping the tears I wasn't supposed to shed. I believed her for too long. I thought maybe love was supposed to hurt, that maybe pain was just a strange kind of affection people didn't talk about out loud. But that night, sitting in that dark room, I felt something shift. My reflection stared back at me from the window, tired, hollow, older than my years. I whispered to her, maybe this is all I'll ever be. And for the first time, I didn't cry. I just sat there. I
Numb,
didn't know
watching
it then,
lightning crawl
but that
across
was the
the
night
sky
my
like
silence
veins.
started to crack. The next morning, I woke up to my mother's voice calling me for breakfast. The same kitchen, the same chipped mugs, the same smell of burnt coffee. But everything felt off, like the world had lost its color. My brother joked about something on TV, and I laughed on cue, like an actress in a movie I didn't remember auditioning
I
for.
wanted
Inside,
someone to look at
I
me
was screaming
and
and see the exhaustion, the fear, the quiet pleading, but no one did. At school, I sat in the back row, tracing patterns on my notebook. My teacher, Mrs. Almeida, noticed me once. "Are you all right, dear?" she asked, her voice soft, hesitant. I smiled. "Yes, ma'am," she nodded, convinced, and moved on. That's when I learned the cruel truth at disappearing. People only standing in what they have the courage to look at. I studied hard. Years passed like that, me pretending at a bakery, others believing. Every real smile for strangers who would forget my face by the next day. And every night, before sleep, I'd whisper to myself that someday someone would notice. Not out of pity, not by accident, but because they cared enough to look deeper. That hope, fragile as it was, one day, kept me breathing.
After too many
but hope
years of
has
waiting,
a way of turning
I met
into
the person
something dangerous
who finally did
when
see
it's
me,
left unattended.
and that's when everything began to unravel. Every lie, every scar, every truth I'd buried under a lifetime of pretending. That's when my story stopped being silent. It's strange how survival can look so much like success. People saw me working hard, studying late, keeping my head down. They called me
What
disciplined.
they didn't
know
was that
every
the
achievement
kind of
came
girl
from
who'll
fear,
make it one
not
day.
ambition. I wasn't chasing dreams. I was running from ghosts. When I turned 21, I moved to Sao Paulo with 2 suitcases and an old promise I'd made to myself. I will never go back. I rented a room above a small convenience store in Villa Mariana. The ceiling leaked during storm, and the traffic never stopped humming. I worked
But
for
for
the
the
flower
first
shop
time,
during the day.
I could breathe
and
without
cleaned
permission.
offices at night. My hands were always cracked from detergent, but I didn't care. They were my hands now, not tools for someone else's control. I remember one winter morning, counting the money I'd earned for the week minus 248 reais, and feeling proud. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I could buy groceries without explaining myself.
Every night,
Drink cheap
I'd return
coffee
to
at
that
dawn
small room
and feel
hang my
human
wet
again.
clothes
But
on the
freedom
chair
comes
and
with a
listen
cost,
to the rain
and
tapping
loneliness
against
was
the
its
glass
interest, like someone knocking softly, asking to be let in. I tried to fill the silence with routine. Wake up, work, study, work again, sleep when exhaustion won. I even learned to smile at strangers, the delivery man, the old lady who bought tulips every Sunday. Those
janitor
moments
who
became my
always
only
hummed
proof
Sinatra
that
while
life
mopping
could be
the
gentle.
floor.
Still, the past had its ways of finding me. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing, the sound of my father's voice echoing in my head. Don't disappoint me. That phrase had become my curse. It drove me to perfection, to sacrifice, to exhaustion. I worked harder than anyone else, terrified that
I
if
was
I stopped,
finishing cleaning
the
an
silence
office
would
on
swallow me
Avenida
again.
Paulista.
One night,
The city lights
around 2
glowed like
a.m.,
ember,
and I caught my reflection in the glass door. The same tired eyes, the same forced calm. I whispered, "You're still that girl." And suddenly, tears came, quiet, uncontrollable. I sank to the floor, clutching the mop, the smell of bleach stinging my nose. It wasn't sadness. It was grief. I realized
during those
I'd
years
spent years
sacrificing
sacrificing everything
fleeting
for a piece
connections,
I'd never
but
earned.
every time
For a
someone
love
got too close
that had never
I
been
pulled
real.
away.
I didn't know how to be seen without being hurt. My scars had become my armor. And yet, deep down, I wanted someone to look past it, to see the girl beneath all that silence. In 2008, I got promoted at the flower shop. The owner, Dona Rosa,
Success
handed
had
me the
stopped
keys
tasting
one morning
sweet.
and
It
said,
was like chewing
"You're
on
in
dry
charge when
petals.
I'm gone."
Beautiful,
I smiled,
but empty.
but inside,
That night,
I
felt
stood
nothing.
outside the shop, watching people pass by, laughing, holding hands. I felt invisible again. I started keeping a small journal then, scribbles of thoughts, fragments of memory. Maybe I don't know what love is. One page said, Maybe it's just something other people
Years
get
blurred
to feel.
into each other.
I stopped
By
writing
the time
after
I
a
turned
few
30,
weeks.
the
I had
words
built
were
a
too
life
heavy to carry
that
home.
looked stable, rent paid, job steady, no bruises, no yelling. But inside, I was still that 12-year-old girl, waiting for someone to notice the scars no one else could see. And then, one ordinary afternoon, someone did. A man came into the shop asking for a bouquet of lilies. He had kind eyes, he said, and gently, the kind of voice, not as an that insult, made you want to listen, but as if he truly saw it. That simple sentence cut through years of pretending. I laughed awkwardly, brushing it off, but something inside me trembled. It was the first time in a long time that I felt seen. I didn't know it then, but that moment, that small, quiet observation, would become the beginning of everything I thought I'd
His
lost.
name was
At
Daniel.
first, he was
Soft-spoken,
everything
patient,
I thought healing
the
looked
kind
like.
of
Man who noticed details others ignored. When he came to the shop that day in 2010, asking for lilies, I remember his eyes following my hand as I wrapped the bouquet. You take care of flowers like they're alive, he said. I smiled, unsure how to respond, because to me they were alive, fragile, temporary,
You must
beautiful
be
in their
exhausted,
decay. He
he'd
came
say,
back 2 days
handing me
later,
a cup
then
of
again
coffee
the next
before
week.
I
By
even
the
had
third
time
visit,
to thank him.
He'd
There was
memorized my
something
schedule,
comforting
in his attention, in the way he remembered small things, that I liked my coffee better, that my right wrist ached when it rained, that I always tucked my hair behind my ear when I was nervous. For months, I let myself believe it was love, real love, not the cold. Daniel was
conditional
kind
in
I'd
ways
known
I
as
didn't
a
know
child. How to accept, opening doors, calling just to ask if I'd eat, holding my hand when I flinched at sudden sound. It felt safe, and that safety was intoxicating. But slowly, his tenderness began to twist. It started with little things. Don't work so late, he'd say. You don't need to exhaust yourself like that. Then, I don't like when other men talk to you myself like that. It was care. His tone not was still control. Soft. But there was still, wasn't this what love did? Protected you, claimed you. 6 months into our relationship, he convinced me to move in with him. You deserve comfort, he said, handing me a key to his apartment, a tidy place in Bella Vista, with pale blue walls and the smell of cedar. It felt like stepping into someone else's life. For the first few weeks, we cooked dinner together. It was perfect. Laughed about my terrible taste in movies. Fell asleep with his arm draped over me like a promise. But then came the small corrections. Why do you wear that dress? It's too tight. You don't need makeup. It's not you. I think your friends take advantage of you. Each word wrapped around me like a ribbon, soft but constricted. I told myself he was right. I'd always needed someone to guide me. One night, to protect me from my own bad choices because of a delivery mix-up. He was waiting by the door when I got home. His face was calm, too calm. You didn't answer my calls, he said. I was worried. I apologized, explaining what happened. He nodded, hugged me tight, so tight I could barely breathe, and whispered, "Just don't scare me like that again, okay?" It sounded like love.
It felt like
He
ownership.
stopped liking my
Months
job,
turned into
said
years,
it was too demanding,
and I started
that
shrinking
it kept
inside
me
that
away
apartment.
from him.
So I quit. He said my friends didn't understand me, so I stopped calling them. He told me my family had hurt me enough, so I stopped visiting. It all made sense when he said it. His words were always wrapped in care, dipped in logic, coated with affection. But the more I obeyed, the less of me remained. I began waking up before him, just to have a few minutes alone, brushing my hair in silence, looking at my reflection and whispering, "You're still here." Some days, I wasn't sure it was true. One evening in 2013, I was making dinner when I dropped a glass. It shattered, the sound slicing through the quiet. He rushed in, eyes wide, and for the first time, I saw something dark flicker
when
there.
you do
You
things
need
like
to be
this.
more careful.
I
apologized.
he said.
He smiled,
Voice low,
but
dangerous.
when he thought I was asleep, I felt the mattress dip as he leaned over me, his hand tracing my arm. "You'd be nothing without me," he whispered, and I believed him, because by then he had already taken everything else. My confidence, my friends doubt my voice, all of it traded for the illusion
It
of
would
safety.
take me
another 2 years to realize that his love was just another form of silence, another way to make my scars invisible. And it would take one impossible request from him to finally wake me up. It was a Thursday in late spring, 2015. I remember the smell of rain again. Always the rain, and how the air in the apartment felt heavier than usual, like it was holding its breath. Daniel had been quieter lately, beneath watching the calm more than of our routine, something waiting to break. That morning, he brewed coffee before I woke up. He never did that. The cup was waiting on the kitchen table, steaming, precise, like a peace offering. "We need to talk," he said. I froze. Those 4 words had become a warning in my life. He sat across from me, fingers interlocked, eyes sharp. I nodded, but kind, because
You know
saying
I
love
anything
you,
else
right?
felt dangerous.
He began. "Then you'll understand what I'm about to ask." He paused, studying me, as if rehearsing my reaction. Then he said it. "I need you to stop working with Rosa." My heart stuttered. "The flower shop?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. He nodded, double quotes, "Yes. It's not good for you anymore. You're always tired. You don't need to be surrounded by people who don't respect you. I can take care of us now." The flower shop wasn't just a job.
I couldn't
It was
speak.
the last piece of me that still belonged to me. It was where I'd built something from scratch, where I still felt useful, alive. I tried to reason with him, but, "Daniel, it's not just about money." He interrupted, voice still calm. "You need to rest." I'm not asking much. Those
Just
2 words
trust me.
had been the
Trust me.
foundation of everything, and the weapon he used most often. I wanted to say no. I wanted to tell him that the shop was the only place where my heartbeat didn't sound like fear. But then he leaned forward, his hand brushing mine. "You promised," he whispered. "You said you'd do anything for us." Anything. It was a word,
I had thrown her out careless, back when I thought love was built on
like
surrender.
always,
Back when
I
I
believed
that
okay,
being chosen
the next
meant
day,
being owned. I went to Rosa with trembling hands and told her I needed to quit. She looked at me for a long time, her eyes narrowing like she could see the truth behind my smile. "Are you sure, Querida?" she asked. "You don't look sure." "I just need a break," I lied. She sighed, then hugged me, the kind of hug that makes your bones
wanted to
remember
tell
what
her
safety
that
feels
I
like.
might not survive
You can
long
always
enough to
come
do
back.
that.
When
She
I got
whispered.
home, Daniel was waiting at the door, his smile wide and perfect. "You did the right thing," he said, kissing my forehead. "Now we can start living the way we're supposed to. The way we're supposed to." At first, it almost felt peaceful. He cooked for me. We watched movies. He told me to relax, to trust
with
him,
every day
to
that
stop
passed,
worrying so much.
I
I felt the walls of the apartment tighten, like invisible hands closing around my throat. I had no reason to leave, no work, no friends, no independence. My world had shrunk to the size of that living room. A few weeks later, he made another request. He wanted me to sell my phone. "It's a distraction," he said, holding it out like it was poison. "You don't need all that noise." He cut
"We
me
have
off.
each
"I'm
other."
your emergency.
I laughed nervously.
His voice was still
"Daniel,
calm.
I need
Still
my
measured.
phone."
But this time it hit differently. A quiet threat wrapped in devotion. I stared at him, and for the first time, I saw the truth. Every kind thing he had ever done for me came with invisible strings. Every "I love you" was a lock. Every "trust me" was a chain. That night, while he slept, I sat on the floor
tapped
of the
Rosa's
kitchen,
number
3 times,
holding my phone,
and deleted it
my
each
hands
time
shaking.
before pressing send. I was terrified of him, of being alone, of being wrong again. The impossible request wasn't just about the job or the phone. It was about erasing me. And I realized, in that dim, suffocating apartment, that I had done the one thing my father always warned me never to do. I had disappointed myself. The
The
next
part of me
morning that had
Daniel
obeyed,
woke up smiling,
that had
as
believed,
if nothing had
that
changed.
had loved
But
blindly.
something inside
She
me
was
had.
gone. And in her place, something new was growing. Something dangerous. Something awake. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday. Funny how the worst truths always arrive dressed like any other day. No thunder, no warning, just quiet footsteps across a fragile floor. Daniel had gone out early, said he was meeting a
He'd been
client.
talking
About a new business venture for weeks. Vague words like partnership and investment, but never any details. I didn't ask questions anymore. Questions made him tense. And tense Daniel was the one I feared most. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. I decided to clean, not because it needed it, but because cleaning gave me a sense of control. However
My
hands
small,
hesitated.
while dusting
I
his
shouldn't
desk,
look.
I
I told
noticed
myself,
a small
but
envelope
curiosity
tucked
has
under
its
a
own
stack of
pulse.
folders.
And that day, it was louder than my fear. Inside the envelope were papers, receipts, contracts, letters. The first thing I saw was my name type neat code. Transfer incha di titularidade, Rosa's floricultura. For a moment, I didn't understand.
My name was listed as the previous owner. The Daniels was the current one. My breath slicing deeper. My fingers went numb. Somehow arranged to buy the flower shop. My flower shop. His name. The date on the document was from the same week I had quit. He had planned everything. The gentle persuasion, the concern, the insistence that I take a break. It hadn't been love. It had been strategy. My chest tightened. I sat down on for a long time. Papers I just stared like snow at around waiting for my mind to find a version of the story that made sense. But there wasn't one. Every thread of affection I had clung to was suddenly tangled in deceit. I searched the folders again, desperate for something, an explanation, a mistake. Instead, I found a photograph. It was of Daniel and Rosa. They were standing outside the flower shop. Rosa's smiling, eyes weren't arms around in this photo. Other. They were tired, like someone forced to pose for something she didn't believe in. My stomach dropped. I remembered the day I quit, how she looked at me, how her voice softened when she said, "You can always come back." She had known. I sat there for what felt like hours, my pulse echoing in my ears. Then the door opened. Daniel walked in, humming softly. For a second, when he saw the papers in my hands, then the mask slipped back on. "I can explain," he said, voice perfectly even. "Explain what?" I asked. My voice sounded foreign, like it belonged to someone braver. He took a step forward. "I did this for us. You were miserable there. I wanted to protect you from people who took advantage of you. You took it from me," I whispered. "You stole my life. But listen, if your healing doesn't always come in grand gestures, to that quiet sometimes it's that found in no one else seems to see. A single word, a single person who refuses to look away. Don't click away now, because the next part of my story will show you how one moment changed everything." He shook his head slowly, his tone soft, patronizing. "No, no, I saved you. You were drowning, and I gave you peace." I said. "Look at you. Call you this sleep. You for eat. A moment. You don't something cry anymore." Flickered in his Isn't eyes. That what you wanted? You should be grateful." I stood up, he said, my hands trembling. His voice suddenly sharp. "No one else would ever love you the way I do." That sentence, I had heard versions of it all my life. From my father, from my mother, from every person who ever used love as a leash. But hearing it now, in that sterile apartment, I don't want by the kind evidence of his manipulation. I said quietly. Something the silence inside that me followed was unbearable. He stared at me, his jaw clenched, his breathing shallow. I thought he might hit me. Instead, he laughed, a low, bitter laugh that didn't sound human. "You think you can survive without me?" I didn't answer. I just walked past him into the small bedroom, grabbed my bag, and began to pack. He just stood my there. My hands were shaking so badly. The way I someone my watches a bird, too he afraid didn't stop to fly. Me. "You'll come back," he said finally. "They always come back." I didn't look at him when I walked out. My body was trembling, but every step felt like reclaiming oxygen. I hadn't breathed in years. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have money. But I had truth, and truth, even when it burns, can be a kind of freedom.
My face
As
was
the
pale,
elevator doors
eyes
closed,
swollen,
I
but
caught
alive.
my reflection
For the
in
first
the mirror.
time in years, I saw me.
And somewhere between the 10th and first floor, I made a silent promise I would never let anyone write my story for me again. I thought that was the end of it. But life, cruel, poetic life, had one more turn waiting. One that would prove that even after betrayal, there are hands gentle enough to heal what
For weeks
others
after
tried
I
to
left
destroy.
Daniel,
I wandered through the city like a ghost who hadn't yet decided whether to live or disappear. I rented a tiny room above a laundromat in Liberty, the kind that smelled of detergent and loneliness, and spent my days avoiding mirrors. My savings barely lasted a month. I worked odd jobs, cleaning, folding, selling snacks at the bus terminal. The days bled into one another, sometimes
shapeless
I'd
and
wake
heavy,
up before dawn,
but at least
and
the
walk
silence was
aimlessly
mine.
through the narrow streets, just to remind myself that I still had legs that could carry me anywhere. I'd see couples laughing over breakfast in cafes, and a strange ache would rise in my chest. Not jealousy, but something deeper. The longing to be understood. Then, one morning, life decided to nudge me. It was raining again. And I ducked under the
air
awning
was
of a
warm
small bookstore
and smelled of
to
old
escape
pages
the downpour
and coffee.
A man at the counter looked up from a stack of books. He was older than me, maybe in his 40s, with silver threads in his hair and a kind of calm that made the noise of the world fade a little. "Rough weather," he said, smiling gently. "Always is," I replied, brushing the rain from my sleeves. He chuckled. "That depends where you stand." It was a small moment, nothing dramatic, but something about the way he said it, as if he actually meant it, lingered. His name was Raphael. He owned the shop, a quiet place called Canto das Horrors, and he insisted I stay until the rain stopped. He made me tea, asked about the book I was holding, and when I stumbled through an answer, he didn't look away. He listened, really listened. "When I
The way
left,"
people
he
do
said,
when they have
"you
no
look like
agenda."
someone who's been carrying too much for too long." The words hit deeper than he could have known. I forced a smile, muttered something polite, and walked away before he could see the tears threatening to rise. But I kept thinking about them all the way home. Over the next few weeks, I found excuses to pass by the shop again. Sometimes to buy a used novel. Sometimes just to
Raphael
stand
never
in
pried,
that quiet space,
never asked
where the air
questions
didn't
that
feel
made
like
me
judgment.
flinch.
He'd simply offer a book, a story, a conversation. One afternoon, he handed me a worn copy of The Little Prince. "You might find yourself in here," he said softly. That night, I read it cover to cover, crying in the glow of a flickering lamp. There was a line that broke me. "It is only with the heart that one can
The very
see rightly."
thing
I'd been my whole
What is
life.
essential,
Unseen,
is invisible to the
unheard,
eye,
misunderstood. Maybe that was why I went back the next day. We talked for hours about books, about silence, about starting over. I told him, carefully, pieces of my story, never all at once, like testing the temperature of cold water. He didn't interrupt. When I said I felt broken, he said quietly, You're not broken.
the way it
You're
had
just
when
tired
Daniel
of pretending.
lied. You're
not the
not.
violent,
Something
shattering
inside
way.
me cracked
This
open
was
then.
different, softer, a kind of breaking that lets the light in. Weeks turned into months. I began helping him at the shop, dusting shelves, arranging books, learning the rhythm of a life built on small, peaceful things. He paid me fairly, but it was never about money. It was about remembering that I was capable. One evening, that I could exist without fear. He handed me a tiny pot with a single sprout inside. You said you used to work with flowers, he said. Maybe you should again. I stared at the fragile green stem, trembling under the soft yellow light. It'll die, I said. He smiled. Then plant another. I took it home. I placed it on the windowsill. Every morning, I watered it. Every night, I whispered to it, almost not words of hope. It grew, but of apology. And so did I. For all the years I'd forgotten how to care for something alive. I started sleeping through the night. I didn't wake up haunted by voices. The ghosts had stopped whispering, or maybe they had just learned that I didn't need saving anymore. I never told Raphael everything, not yet. But one evening, as the sky bled orange and the world outside the shop quieted, I froze. My heart stumbling over itself. Sometimes those exact carry scars you can't almost see. The same doesn't mean I'd they're not there. To myself all those years ago now came from someone else's lip. That's when I realized he saw me, not as someone to fix, not as someone fragile, but as someone real. And that was the most terrifying and beautiful thing that had ever happened to me. Healing doesn't announce itself. It doesn't burst through the door in the with sound light of rain and certainty that no longer terrifies you. In the taste of coffee that starts to mean comfort again. It took me months to notice that I was breathing differently. My chest didn't feel like a locked room anymore. It felt open. Every morning, I'd wake up to the faint smell of books that still clung to my clothes from the shop. I'd make tea, check the tiny plant on my windowsill. I was learning what joy more without leaves permission felt and like, smile at but something healing also that wasn't anyone else's to the surface. Not as nightmares this time, but as quiet truths waiting to be seen. One afternoon, as I arranged a stack of poetry books at Canto das Horas, a verse caught my eye. We must love ourselves gently, the way sunlight loves the cracks in old walls. I froze, my fingers brushing the words. They made me like unlovable, they were alive. But now, for so long, standing I there had in the soft hum of they that made small me bookstore. I wondered if maybe they were the very places where light entered. Raphael noticed the way I lingered. Good line, isn't it? He said, looking up from his desk. I nodded. It feels true, he smiled. Truth usually does, especially when it hurts a little. There was a kind of wisdom in his simplicity, not the heavy, intellectual kind, but the kind that came from having lived and lost and chosen to stay kind anyway. I wanted that for myself. One evening, after closing, he asked if I'd help set up a small event, a poetry reading. I almost said no. The idea of standing among strangers again, of being seen, made
People
my
sat in
stomach
folding
tighten,
chairs,
but something in
their
his calm
voices
gaze
blending
pushed
in
me
a low
forward.
murmur
The
of
night of the
anticipation.
reading, the shop was glowing with
wall,
soft light,
invisible as always, until Raphael called my name.
"You should read something," he said, holding out a small piece of paper. I laughed nervously. "I don't write poetry. Maybe you do," he said. "You just don't call it that yet." My hands trembled as I unfolded the page. It was something
my body
I'd written
carries
months
scars
earlier.
no one can
A
see.
note I'd left
but I'm
between
learning
the
to
pages
touch
of a
them
book
without fear.
never meant
The
to be
words
seen.
echoed through the room, and for the first time in my life, silence didn't feel like suffocation. It felt like listening. After the event, people came to me, strangers with soft smiles and gentle eyes. One woman whispered, "Thank you for saying what I never could." I didn't know what to
That
say.
night,
I just
as
nodded,
Raphael
tears
locked the
blurring
door,
everything
he looked
into
at
light
me and said, "You spoke with your whole heart tonight." I was terrified, I admitted. He nodded. "That's what courage is, being terrified and still showing up." I walked home under the soft drizzle, the streets shimmering with the reflection of city lights. The world looked the same, but I wasn't. I was no longer the girl waiting for someone to notice
I was
her
the
pain.
woman learning to name it, to hold it, to turn it into something that might help someone else breathe easier. Days turned into weeks, and my routines became rituals. Tea, books, laughter, watering the plant, writing small fragments of thoughts on scraps of paper, each one a seed of something new. I even called Rosa once. She cried when she heard my voice. "You sound alive," she said.
"Because
sometimes
I whispered,
healing doesn't
and I
mean
meant
forgetting the
but
past.
life,
It means
strange
facing it
poetry
when it finally
wasn't
comes
finished
knocking
teaching
again.
me." And one rainy afternoon, as I stood by the bookstore window arranging a display of lilies, I saw a familiar figure on the other side of the glass. Daniel. Older. Leaner. The same faint smile that once felt like safety. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second before he looked away.
I didn't
but
fear
in that
him.
moment,
I simply
understood
didn't
something
belong
I never
to
had
him before.
anymore.
I didn't
turned
hate him.
away, my hands steady, my breath calm, and for the first time in my life, I didn't flinch when the thunder rolled outside, because this time the storm was only weather, and I had survived worse. It had been 12 years since I last saw the house where it all began. The one with the cracked green shutters, the smell of damp
driven
wood,
past that
and
town
the
many
silence
times
that
on
hid
buses,
screams to well,
eyes closed,
pretending it no longer existed. But that day, I turned the wheel toward it. Maybe because I was ready, or maybe because part of me had been waiting all along to look the ghost in the eye. The road to Sao Bento was smaller than I remembered. Its once busy sidewalks now lined with abandoned stores. The wind carried the faint scent of sugarcane.
The gate
and
hung
rust.
crooked,
I
the
stopped
paint
in
flaking
front of
like
the
dead
house.
skin.
My
Time
hands
had
trembling
done what I
against the
couldn't.
steering wheel.
It had broken the place down.
I stepped out slowly. Every sound was a memory. The creak of the steps, the hum of the nearby power lines, the wind brushing through the dry grass. My chest tightened as I reached the porch. The key I once carried around my neck, That small symbol of belonging now lay cold in my pocket. I didn't know
because
why
it was
I'd kept
proof
it all
that
these
it
years.
all
Had been real. The door opened with a groan. Dust filled the air, heavy and dry. I could almost hear my mother's voice echoing from the kitchen, sharp and distant. Don't make noise, Anna. He's tired. I had obeyed, always obeyed. The living room was smaller now. The couch where I used to sit, legs folded and silent, was still there, covered in a sheet. I ran my fingers over the fabric. Something older. It disintegrated something that didn't belong to time. Grief. My mother's old room was locked, but the door to mine opened easily. Inside, the wallpaper was peeling, pale pink turning into gray. The bed frame rusted. The small dresser, the one where I used to hide letters to myself, still stood crooked by the wall. I pulled the top drawer open and found one of them. Yellow buyers, a hollow if sound. Someone ever that broke this into tears. Tell her I had written here. That when tell I her was she's 12. Not crazy. I hadn't known who I was writing to. Maybe to the woman I became. I sat on the floor, the weight of years pressing down on me. For the first time, I didn't run from the memories. I let them play. The nights when Daniel would slam the door, my mother's silence the next morning, the way she'd hand me breakfast it like was nothing all happened, the past replaying itself like a film I could finally watch without flinching. Then I heard a sound, a faint cough. I froze. From the hallway came a familiar shuffle, slow, tired, but unmistakable. My mother. She looked older, frailer than I'd imagined. Her hair, once black and sharp as her words, was now white and thin. Her eyes widened when she saw me. For a long moment, I didn't think of us spoke. Anna, I almost she whispered. Silence. The word breaking only the ticking of an old clock. I didn't move. The space between us. I heard about him, she said finally. He's gone now. I nodded. I know. She looked down, twisting her hands together. I didn't protect you. The words landed heavy, fragile, raw. I had waited my whole life to hear them. And now that I did, I didn't know what to do with them. We stood you there, were afraid. To broken versions of the same story. To hate you for and that. I realized her eyes filled that forgiveness wasn't a single act. It was a long, trembling breath. A decision made again and again. I reached for her hand. She flinched at first, then let me hold it. Her skin was paper thin, her pulse faint but steady. I don't need you to say sorry, I whispered. I just need you to see me. I see you. We sat she on said, the edge of that dusty bed, and I'm sorry until the light took me so turned gold. She talked about her fear, her shame, her silence, and for the first time, I listened not as a child waiting for love, but as a woman who had built herself without. When I left that evening, the air felt different, lighter. The house behind me was still haunted, but no longer by me. I had taken my ghost driving with me away and given her a name. The horizon and thought of Raphael, of Rosa, of the bookstore, of the quiet mornings that had become my new home. I realized something then. Healing wasn't about escaping the past. It was about carrying it without letting it define the weight of your steps. The road shimmered in the dying sunlight, and I whispered to the wind, I forgive you.
I wasn't sure if I was speaking
but
to
it
my
didn't
mother,
matter to
because
Daniel
for the first
or
time,
to the frightened
it felt
girl
true.
I once was.
When I came
Maybe
back
to
the
all
city,
of them.
I didn't tell anyone what had happened. I just walked into Canto das Horrors the next morning like always, set my bag behind the counter, and started arranging the book. Raphael took one look at me and knew something had shifted. You went back, he said softly. I nodded. It's over now.
From that
He
day
smiled.
on, not
Something
the kind
inside
that
me
asks
burned
questions,
differently. I
but the
stopped
kind that
walking with my
understands
shoulders curled
answers.
in.
You haven't
Stopped
said out loud.
apologizing for existing. It wasn't an overnight transformation. More like learning how to stand in sunlight after years underground. My voice, once small and trembling, started to find its shape one afternoon. A girl came into the bookstore. She couldn't have been more than 17. She wore long sleeves in the heat of summer, and her eyes, those hollow, restless eyes, told me everything before she said a word. She asked for a book about starting over. I handed her the bell jar, but then paused and said, maybe this one, too, giving her a slim poetry collection I'd once clung to. She looked at the title and whispered, do you think people ever really start over? She gave
Not
me
really,
a small,
I said,
disbelieving
but I
smile.
think we can
I
begin
saw
again
myself in her then,
with the same
same
scars,
hidden bruises,
but a different story.
the same silence begging to be noticed. After she left, I couldn't shake the thought that maybe I could do more than sell books. That maybe the words that once saved me could save someone else if I let them. So I began to write. Not poetry, not fiction, just truth. Pieces of my story. You
Raw
should post
and
this,
imperfect,
he said.
I
didn't plan
tapping
to
the
share them.
page.
But
People need to
Raphael
read
found
it.
one on
I
the
don't
counter
want
one day.
attention.
This isn't about attention, he said. It's about connection. So I did. I created a small blog, Scars Unseen. I wrote every night after closing, candle flickering beside me. The first post was titled, For the Ones Who Survived Quietly. I didn't expect anyone to read it, but
Some
they did.
shared their
Comments
own
began
stories,
to appear,
trembling in
strangers
honesty.
thanking
One
me
woman
for
wrote
saying
what they
I thought
couldn't.
I was the only one who couldn't sleep because of memory that no one else believed. Another said, your words made me feel less alone tonight. I cried reading them, every single one. It was as if the silence that had suffocated me for years was breaking open across countless other rooms. A few months later, a local organization reached out, asking if I would speak at a small gathering for survivors of domestic violence. I almost said no. The thought of standing in front of a crowd made my throat close up. But then I remembered that girl in the bookstore, the one who couldn't meet my eyes. I realized this wasn't about me anymore. The night of the event, I stood behind the curtain. I walked out to
so
the
hard it
microphone.
hurt.
The
host
room dimly
whispered,
lit. Whenever
"Faces
you're
turned
ready.
toward me."
My hands shook, but my voice was steady. I used to think silence protected me. I began, but it only protected the ones who hurt me. My body carried marks that no one could see, and for a long time, I thought that meant I was invisible, but I wasn't. I was surviving,
The words came like rain.
I told them about
hesitant
the house,
at first,
the
then
manipulation,
unstoppable, the fear, the woman who finally saw me. I told them about the bookstore, the poetry, the day I realized scars are just proof that pain didn't win. When I finished, there was no applause, just silence, deep, heavy, sacred. Then, slowly, people began to stand. Some were crying, some just nodded. One woman reached for my hand. That
When
night,
I stepped off
I
the
walked
stage
home under
and
the city
whispered,
lights.
"You
The
said
cool
my
air
story
brushing
out
against
loud."
my skin like a blessing. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who hid her bruises and her voice. She had dreamed of being saved, but what she didn't know was that one day she'd be the one holding the lantern. And maybe that's what healing really is, not a destination, but a torch passed quietly from one survivor to another. A promise
sat
by
that
the window,
when
opened my
spoken,
notebook,
becomes power.
and wrote, "My body still carries scars, but now they tell stories, not of what was done to me, but of what I chose to become after. And for the first time in my life, I didn't need someone else to see me. I saw myself. Years have passed since I first left that house, since I first walked away from Daniel, since I first dared to plant a seed for myself in the ruins of my own life. But they no longer define me. They are maps, lines of survival, evidence that I endured, that I refused to be swallowed by silence. I live now in a small apartment above the city, windows wide open to sunlight and wind. My mornings are quiet, filled with tea, books, and the gentle sound of life going on outside. I tend to my plants. I've planted lilies, each again, one a living testament their white to petals patience gleaming and softly care. In the morning light. A small victory against the shadows of the past. I continue to write, continue to speak, continue to share my story. Every message I receive, every comment, every person who reaches out saying, "I see you," reminds me that visibility is a kind of salvation. That to be seen, really seen, is the closest thing to grace along the way. One another, not the kind who demands obedience, but someone who mirrors the light back at me, not to save me, but to walk beside me. Raphael remained a constant presence, a quiet lighthouse in the tumultuous seas of my history. And from him, I learned that love can exist without chains. The memory of Daniel is no longer a shackle, but a lesson carved into my conscience. I don't hate him. I don't need vengeance, but it can be understood, acknowledged, and transformed. I learned to take the parts of me he tried to erase and mold them into strength. Every fear, every trembling hand, every night spent counting tears, they became fuel for the voice I never had. Some nights, when the city sleeps and the street lights flicker against the darkness, I sit by my window and remember the 12-year-old girl, because she's still her reflection, alive in me. Maybe she survived, and so did I. And now, we both know that survival is not a quiet surrender, but an act of rebellion, courage, and ultimately freedom. I often return to the small bookstore, now almost like a second home. Sometimes I meet people who are still carrying invisible scars, still
because
searching
being
for someone to notice,
even for a
I
moment,
don't try to
can
save
change
them.
a story
I simply
entirely.
see them.
I
And
look
sometimes
at the world differently
that is
now.
enough. I see beauty in fragility, strength in vulnerability, and hope in the simplest acts. A shared smile, a hand held out, a story told without fear. I have learned that pain, when acknowledged, does not diminish life. It deepens it, makes it more human, more luminous.
And so
not
I
defined
live.
by
I
what
breathe.
was done to
I
me.
write.
I
I
am
plant
defined
lilies
by
on
the
my
life I
windowsill,
chose after it.
water them
If
each
anyone
morning,
ever asks me
and
what
watch
it
them
means
grow.
to survive invisible scars, I will tell them this. To survive is to reclaim your story. To be seen is to transform your pain into light. And to carry scars is not to carry shame, but proof of everything you endured and overcame. I am no longer the girl who
And
hid in
for the
shadows.
first time,
I am the
I
woman
feel the
who
simple,
stands in
profound
profound
freedom
of
unafraid.
being wholly, entirely seen.